The crowd murmured as the auctioneer slammed his gavel. One by one, the dogs were sold, trained, strong, perfect. But when the last cage rolled out, the room fell silent. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Who'd want that dog?" someone whispered. "No one wants a broken dog," another muttered. The auctioneer's voice echoed. "Starting bid, $10. Silence. People looked away, shaking their heads. Minutes passed. The shepherd lowered his gaze, trembling, his ears folding back as if he understood he'd been discarded. Just as the auctioneer sighed and prepared to move on, a quiet voice from the back spoke. Steady, calm. "I'll take him." Everyone turned. A stranger stood there, hand raised, eyes locked on the trembling dog. No one knew who he was, or why he'd bid on a dog no one wanted. But what followed would leave the entire town shocked. Stay till the end. This story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The auction barn was louder than usual that evening. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of restless bidders. Boots scraped across dusty floors, and murmurs floated like trapped smoke beneath the high metal roof. Bright overhead lights cast harsh shadows, giving the place a cold, impersonal feeling, like everything here was just another object being bought and sold. Yet, in the center of the ring, standing alone on trembling legs, was a German shepherd who didn't belong in a place like this. His coat was dull, patches of fur missing, and his right hind leg carried a stiffness that revealed months of pain. The crowd's energy didn't excite him. It pressed on him like a weight he could no longer carry. The announcer tapped the microphone twice, clearing his throat as if preparing to sell a regular item, not a life. Next up, retired police K9, male, 5 years old, injured during duty. His voice echoed through the rafters, but most people weren't listening. Their eyes were focused on younger dogs tied to nearby posts, the ones full of energy and promise. This injured shepherd, head lowered, was treated like he was invisible. Families leaned over rails to get better views of the others, but no one reached out a hand toward the dog in the ring. No one called his name. No one cared that he had once saved lives. The shepherd shifted uncomfortably, trying to balance his weight on 3 good legs. His breathing was slow, labored. Every movement reminded him of the explosion that had ended his career and nearly his life. Tonight should have been a night of honor, or at least respect. But instead, he was standing on display like a damaged product. A soft whine slipped from his throat, barely heard above the chatter. He scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar scent or a reassuring voice. But nothing came. Only strangers staring without warmth or kindness. Near the auctioneer's platform, a cluster of men whispered among themselves, arms crossed, faces unmoved. One shrugged dismissively. Another smirked. Someone muttered, "He won't last long. Look at that leg." Their words were sharp and careless, slicing through the dog more painfully than any wound. The shepherd tucked his tail closer to his body and lowered his head again, trying to make himself smaller, as if disappearing would save him from the humiliation of being unwanted. Dust swirled around his paws as a cold breeze slipped under the barn doors. But beyond the noise, beyond the crowds, beyond the indifference, something subtle shifted. A pair of eyes from the far back corner didn't look away from him. While everyone else focused on younger, stronger dogs, that distant figure watched only the injured shepherd. Unmoving, silent, observant. The dog didn't notice it yet. The crowd didn't notice it either. But that quiet presence was about to change everything. And for the first time in hours, a thin thread of fate tightened quietly around the forgotten K9, pulling him toward a future that no one in that auction hall could have predicted. The murmurs around the barn grew sharper as more people noticed the injured shepherd still standing alone in the ring. Some leaned in closer, not out of concern, but curiosity, the kind reserved for things they didn't understand or didn't value. A middle-aged man shook his head with a dismissive sigh. "Poor thing can barely stand," he muttered. What would anyone do with him now? His companion shrugged, already turning away to inspect a younger dog barking eagerly behind them. The shepherd heard none of their words. Yet he felt every rejection in the stiffness of his posture, in the trembling of his damaged leg, in the sinking of his tired eyes. Across the railing, a woman with folded arms whispered to her teenage son, "These old police dogs, once they're hurt, that's it. They're no good anymore." The boy nodded, though his gaze lingered with a hint of sympathy. But sympathy didn't translate to action. No one stepped closer. No one called out a bid. The shepherd's ears twitched at their voices, and he tried lifting his head, hoping anyone, might look at him differently. But the weight of judgment in the room pressed him back down, stealing what little confidence he had left. He lowered his gaze, staring at the dusty floor as if the dirt might somehow comfort him. Near the far corner, two men in heavy jackets leaned against the wooden railings, smirking quietly. "They should have put him down," one said under his breath. "Auctioning a broken dog is pointless." The other laughed softly, nudging his elbow. "Maybe they'll give him away for scrap if nobody bids." Their callousness hung in the air like poison. People around them chuckled awkwardly, not daring to add more, but not brave enough to disagree either. The shepherd shifted again, his legs wobbling slightly. Every movement betrayed the pain he tried so hard to hide. The auctioneer tapped his microphone repeatedly, trying to regain attention. But the crowd seemed more interested in gossip than compassion. "Come on, folks," he said with forced cheer. "He's still trained, still loyal, just needs a little care." But his voice wavered. He knew the truth. This crowd wasn't here for loyalty. They were here for strength, speed, obedience. Things the injured shepherd could no longer offer. Someone muttered, "Why bother? He's useless now." Another nodded in agreement, eyes already drifting elsewhere. Yet amid the dismissal, amid the laughter, amid the cold indifference, one figure still watched from the shadows, silent, steady, unblinking. The crowd saw a broken dog, but the quiet stranger saw something else entirely, something worth saving. The auctioneer's smile began to fade as he scanned the uninterested crowd. He cleared his throat loudly, tapping the microphone again in hopes of pulling attention back to the ring. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, forcing energy into his voice, "this is a retired police K-9. Highly trained, loyal, brave." His words echoed through the barn, but only a handful of people glanced up. Most continued talking among themselves, their eyes drifting to healthier dogs waiting nearby. The shepherd stood motionless, his injured leg trembling slightly under the weight of the moment, under the weight of being unwanted. The auctioneer shifted his stance, trying to keep the momentum alive. He served for 4 years, saved multiple lives, worked through storms, raids, dangerous terrain. He paused, hoping the dog's history might spark interest. But the crowd remained silent, unimpressed. One man scoffed, "Doesn't look like he can save anyone now." A few laughed under their breath. The shepherd's ears flicked the sound, but he didn't raise his head. He seemed to understand that the room had already judged him, decided what he was worth, or rather, what he wasn't worth. Feeling pressure from the organizers behind him, the auctioneer tried again. "All right, we'll start low. Opening bid, $100. Surely someone here wants a trained dog at that price." He extended his hand toward the audience, waiting for even the slightest response. But not a single hand moved, not even a twitch. The silence stretched thin, growing heavier with each passing second. 100, do I hear 100? His voice cracked as he looked desperately from row to row. Nothing. The crowd avoided eye contact, some pretending to be busy, others shrugging indifferently. He lowered the price. 90? 80? 70? Still nothing. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to acknowledge the humiliation unfolding in front of them. The shepherd took a small, shaky step, nearly stumbling. Dust puffed beneath his paw. The auctioneer felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew what happened to dogs who didn't sell, places they were sent, people who bought them cheaply for harsh purposes. He didn't want that fate for this K-9. "Come on, folks," he pleaded softly, no longer hiding his frustration. "He's not just a dog. He served men and women who protect us. He deserves better than this." In the back of a room, the quiet stranger watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. The auctioneer didn't notice him yet. He was too busy fighting the sinking fear that he might be forced to hand the dog over to buyers he didn't trust. For the first time that night, the shepherd lifted his head slightly, his eyes scanning the room one more time, almost as if searching for anyone, who believed he was still worth something. But the crowd remained still, uninterested. The auctioneer exhaled slowly, defeated. He raised his hand one last time. "Going once," he whispered, voice heavy with sadness. In the farthest corner of the auction hall, where the flickering lights barely reached, a lone man stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket. He hadn't spoken a word since the auction began. He hadn't moved much either. People around him shifted, whispered, laughed, but he remained still, as if the chaos of the room couldn't touch him. His gaze stayed fixed on only one thing, the injured shepherd in the center ring. While everyone else dismissed the dog as worthless, the stranger's eyes carried something different, something heavy, something hidden, something that made him impossible to read. The stranger's presence was quiet but unmistakable. Even without speaking, he drew attention from those who happened to glance his way. His posture was calm, almost too calm for a place filled with noise and impatience. He didn't react when people mocked the dog. He didn't look up when the auctioneer pleaded for bids. He simply watched, breathing slowly, as if each second meant more to him than anyone could understand. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense beneath the dim overhead lights. Yet there was a softness in his eyes, an old pain flickering like a dying flame. A couple nearby whispered, trying to make sense of him. "Who's that guy? Haven't seen him around here before." The other shrugged. "Probably just another buyer." But the stranger didn't look like someone here for business. He didn't carry the eager expression of bidders hunting for deals, nor the cold smile of men who purchased animals for harsh purposes. No, his face held something deeper, something personal. His eyes followed the shepherd's every small movement, every trembling shift of weight, every attempt the dog made to stand with dignity despite the pain. The shepherd finally lifted his gaze and met the stranger's eyes across the barn. For a brief moment, the noise of the auction seemed to fade. The dog's ears twitched, his body stiffening as if a distant memory brushed against him. A faint whine escaped his throat, soft, unsure. The stranger inhaled sharply, but didn't look away. Their silent exchange lasted only a second, but it was enough. Enough for the stranger's clenched fists to loosen. Enough for something unresolved inside him to stir awake. He stepped a little closer to the railing, though no one noticed. His boots pressed into the dusty floor, leaving faint prints behind. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his hand. Not yet. But the way he looked at the shepherd, it wasn't the look of a buyer. It was the look of someone who had come for a reason he hadn't revealed to anyone. Not yet. Long before the auction hall, before the trembling leg and lowered head, the German shepherd had been a force of nature, sharp, fearless, and unbreakably loyal. His final mission had begun on a cold, wind-cut morning when he and his handler, Officer Ryan Hale, were dispatched to the outskirts of town. A warehouse burglary had escalated into something far more dangerous. Reports said the suspects were armed. The call came through the radio fast and tense, but Ryan's voice stayed calm as he stroked the shepherd's neck. "Stay close, buddy, just like always." The dog's ears perked, eyes alert. Back then, pain was a foreign word to him. He lived for the work. Their SUV screeched to a stop outside the abandoned warehouse. The air smelled of metal and dust, the wind carrying faint echoes from inside. Backup was still minutes away. Ryan drew his weapon and signaled the shepherd forward. Together, they approached the broken side door. Each step was quiet, controlled, practiced. This was what the dog had been trained for. Inside, shadows stretched across the concrete floor, broken crates scattered everywhere. The shepherd lowered his head, inhaling sharply. His tail stiffened. He had picked up something, fear, adrenaline, a scent that didn't belong. A sudden clatter echoed from the far end of the warehouse, and Ryan moved first, his boots hitting the ground in silent urgency. "Go," he whispered. The shepherd launched forward, gliding across the floor like a silent arrow. He found the suspect behind a stack of wooden pallets, clutching a weapon and trying to load it with frantic hands. The shepherd's bark exploded through the building, A command, a warning, a demand to surrender. But the suspect didn't. He raised the weapon toward Ryan. The shepherd moved without hesitation. His body crashed into the man's arm, knocking the gun aside. The struggle was fast, violent. The suspect shoved him hard, trying to break free. The dog lunged again, teeth gripping fabric, pulling him down. Ryan rushed to help, but in that split second, everything went wrong. A second suspect, hidden in the darkness, triggered an explosive device meant to delay police entry. The blast tore through the warehouse with a thunderous roar. Dust, fire, and debris erupted everywhere. The shepherd felt the shockwave before he heard it, felt the pain before he understood it. Ryan's scream echoed as the explosion hurled them both backward. The shepherd hit the ground hard, his hind leg twisting under the force. The world blurred, turning into a swirl of smoke and flickering orange light. He tried to stand but collapsed, pain ripping through his body like lightning. Ryan crawled toward him despite his own injuries, coughing, eyes burning from the smoke. "No, no, stay with me," he shouted, lifting the dog's head gently. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup finally arrived. But for the shepherd, the scene dissolved into a haze of agony and fading consciousness. Later, in the hospital, Ryan refused to leave his partner's side. He sat beside the metal table, holding the dog's paw while doctors worked to stabilize him. "You're a fighter," he whispered through clenched teeth. "You don't quit. Not on me." The shepherd blinked slowly, trying to respond. But everything hurt. Everything was heavy. Everything was slipping away. And then, one morning, Ryan didn't return. He vanished from the shepherd's life without a goodbye, without an explanation. The department made decisions behind closed doors. Papers were signed. The injured canine was quietly removed from duty. No handler stepped forward to take him home. That was the beginning of the abandonment that eventually led him here, to the auction ring, limping, confused, and alone. But fate was already moving, drawing someone back toward him, someone who had never truly left. Most people in the barn didn't know the dog's name, his service record, or the missions he had survived. To them, he was just another retired canine, one of many handed over to the auction system that moved quickly and cared very little. These auctions weren't designed for honor or gratitude. They were designed for speed and profit. Injured dogs, especially those no longer fit for duty, were pushed to the bottom of the list. Buyers wanted strong bodies, sharp instincts, and clean medical records. A canine with a damaged leg? That was considered a liability, a risk, an expense waiting to happen. Some attendees knew the darker side of these events, but refused to acknowledge it. If a dog didn't sell, he could be bought cheaply by individuals who saw him as nothing more than a tool. Some were used for breeding, others for security work they were too hurt to handle. A few disappeared into hands that trained animals harshly for illegal trades. Everyone in that barn had heard rumors, stories passed in hushed tones, stories that made good men uncomfortable and careless men shrug. Tonight, those whispers clung to the shepherd like a shadow. Families avoided the dog because they feared the responsibility. Older men turned away because they didn't want a project. Younger buyers overlooked him because he wasn't impressive anymore. Even rescue groups struggled at auctions like this. Limited funding forced them to choose carefully, and most walked in hoping for younger dogs with better chances. The shepherd, standing in the center ring with his trembling leg and dulled coat, represented a future full of medical bills and uncertainty. And for that reason, people kept their hands buried in their pockets. The auctioneer knew all of this. He had seen too many good dogs end up in the wrong hands simply because they were injured, older, or no longer wanted by the departments they once served. He watched the shepherd with a heaviness in his chest, knowing the dog had given everything and received almost nothing in return. But he also knew he couldn't force anyone to care. "Last chance," he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the silent crowd. No hand lifted. No voice spoke. No one stepped forward. Except, quietly, from the back row, the stranger shifted his stance, eyes darkening with purpose. He wasn't leaving without that dog. The auction hall grew uncomfortably still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a place built for shouting bids and clapping hands. Even the younger dogs tied along the side rails stopped barking, sensing the shift in the air. The injured shepherd stood alone under the harsh spotlight, his shadow stretching across the dusty floor like a long, fading memory. His ears twitched as the auctioneer's voice echoed through the barn, louder this time, almost pleading. "Going once," he called, scanning every row, every corner, every face. But no one moved. The shepherd slowly lowered his head, his neck muscles tightening as he fought the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. He had stood tall through gunfire, explosions, storms, missions that would break weaker animals. But tonight, the silence hurt more than any wound. This wasn't the kind of danger he had been trained to face. This was something he couldn't control, being forgotten, being left behind. He shifted his injured leg slightly, the sharp pain shooting upward, making him wince. But he didn't cry out. His loyalty, even now, wouldn't let him show weakness. A few people whispered among themselves, stealing pitying glances before turning away. One woman muttered, "Poor thing, but what can we do?" Another man sighed, "Not our responsibility." Their words drifted through the barn like cold wind, reaching the shepherd even if he couldn't understand the language. He felt the meaning. He felt the rejection. His tail, once proud and confident, curled softly toward his body. His shoulders slumped. It was the posture of a warrior who had given everything and received nothing in return. The auctioneer swallowed hard, sensing the humiliation wrapped around the moment. He didn't want to say the next words, but rules were rules. "Going twice," he announced, his voice cracking slightly. This was it. One more call, and the dog would be handed over to whoever took unwanted animals at the end of the night. Someone the auctioneer didn't trust. Someone who didn't care whether the shepherd had once saved lives or served loyally. A knot twisted in his stomach as he looked at the trembling dog. "Last call," he murmured. The shepherd lifted his eyes, just enough to look toward the crowd one last time. Not with hope anymore, just a quiet acceptance. He had learned over months of recovery that pain came and went, but loneliness stayed. His gaze drifted across strangers who refused to meet his eyes until they landed on the shadowed figure in the back. The stranger's posture didn't change. His hands remained tucked in his pockets. But his eyes, those eyes, held something the shepherd recognized. Not pity, not fear. Something else. Something familiar. A faint breath escaped the dog's nose, almost like a plea, but he barely had the strength to lift his head fully. He braced himself for the final announcement, the moment that would seal his fate. The auctioneer's voice tightened. "Sold too." But before he could finish, a quiet shift cut through the silence. Someone stepped forward. The auctioneer inhaled shakily, ready to close the bidding and move on, when a sudden shift in the room caught his attention. A single hand rose from the far back row, steady, deliberate, unhurried. The movement was so subtle that only a few people noticed at first. But those who did turned their heads sharply, whispering in surprise. For nearly an hour, that quiet stranger had stood motionless, hidden in the shadows. Now, without hesitation, he lifted his hand higher, signaling a bid no one expected. The auctioneer froze mid-sentence, his gaze locking onto the raised hand as disbelief washed over him. The shepherd felt the change before he understood it. His ears twitched, his eyes lifting slowly as if pulled by an unseen force. He saw the stranger step forward slightly, the dim lights catching the edge of his jaw, the outline of his shoulders. Something stirred inside the dog, a faint, distant memory buried beneath months of pain and confusion. The barn, once heavy with rejection, suddenly felt different, lighter, warmer. The shepherd blinked, unsure if what he saw was real or just hope playing tricks on his tired mind. Whispers rippled across the crowd like wind through dry grass. "Who is he?" someone murmured. Nobody else bid. "Why him?" another questioned. People craned their necks to get a better look at the stranger, but his expression remained unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't waver. His eyes stayed locked on the injured shepherd with an intensity that silenced even the loudest skeptics. The crowd's confusion grew, but the stranger seemed unaffected. He wasn't here for approval. He wasn't bidding because the price was low or because he wanted a bargain. He had a purpose, one no one else understood. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice trembling just slightly. We have a bid." The words echoed strangely through the barn, breaking the long drought of silence that had suffocated the dog moments earlier. The shepherd lifted his head a little higher, his tail giving the faintest twitch. For the first time that night, something resembling life flickered in his eyes. He didn't know the man's name, but something about him felt familiar, like a scent carried on a forgotten memory. The stranger lowered his hand slowly, but his posture remained firm, unshaken by the stares burning into him. The air in the barn tightened, as if everyone was waiting for something else to happen, something bigger. The shepherd's heart beat faster, not in fear this time, but in a quiet, fragile hope he no longer knew he was capable of feeling. And though no one in that room could explain why, everyone felt it. The story of this forgotten K9 was no longer ending here. It was just beginning. A tense quiet settled over the barn after the stranger raised his hand, but it didn't last long. From the left side of the room, a chair scraped harshly against the wooden floor, slicing through the silence. A bulky man in a dark leather jacket stood up, his expression twisted with annoyance. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the injured shepherd, then at the quiet stranger. "Hold on," he growled, lifting his hand lazily. "I'll bid." His voice carried through the barn with a cold, unnerving confidence. People nearby exchanged uneasy glances. They knew him. Or, at least, they knew the type. Men like him didn't buy dogs for companionship. They bought them for profit. The auctioneer hesitated, his fingers tightening on the microphone. He recognized the man too. His reputation wasn't just bad, it was dangerous. Rumors followed him, stories about dogs disappearing into harsh training pits, underground rings, brutal work environments. The idea of the injured shepherd ending up with someone like him sent a chill through the room. The auctioneer cleared his throat, forcing out the words, "We have another bid." His tone betrayed his discomfort, but rules were rules. He couldn't refuse a legitimate offer. The shepherd sensed the shift instantly. His ears pulled back, body stiffening as the man's harsh voice echoed again. Even injured, he recognized danger when he heard it. His eyes darted between the two bidders, one staring at him with quiet familiarity, the other glaring with impatience and greed. A low, uncertain whine escaped his throat. The barn's energy twisted into something sharp, heavy, and unpredictable. The man in the leather jacket stepped forward, boots stomping against the dusty floor. 200, he announced, his lips curling. It wasn't generosity, it was possession. He didn't care about loyalty or history. He cared about what the dog could be used for, even broken. People watched him with discomfort, but no one dared interfere. He had a reputation for settling disagreements in ways that didn't involve words. The quiet stranger didn't react at first. His posture stayed firm, shoulders relaxed, gaze locked solely on the shepherd. But then he lifted his chin slightly, eyes sharpening. Without even stepping forward, he spoke for the first time that night. 250. His voice was calm, steady, and controlled. No bravado, no anger. Just certainty. The crowd's heads turned, sensing the invisible line drawn between the two men. The leather-jacketed bidder's nostrils flared. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone so quietly composed. 300, he snapped. The stranger didn't blink. 350. Gasps rippled through the barn. The tension thickened, wrapping around every person like a coil tightening. The injured shepherd watched the exchange with growing intensity, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He didn't understand the numbers, but he understood tone. Danger in one voice, protection in the other. His gaze settled on the stranger, eyes softening as if drawn by a memory he couldn't fully place. The aggressive bidder stepped closer to the ring, fists clenched. "Why do you even want this broken thing?" he spat, voice dripping with contempt. "He's useless." The stranger didn't flinch, didn't look away. His response was quiet, but it struck the room like thunder. "He's not useless," he said. "You just don't know who he is." The shepherd's heart pounded. The crowd leaned forward. The bidding war had only just begun. The barn fell eerily silent after the stranger's quiet declaration. Every head turned toward him, waiting for an explanation he didn't immediately give. The shepherd's ears twitched, his breathing growing shallow, as if he sensed something stirring in the space between them. Some truth not yet spoken. The stranger slowly stepped forward, emerging from the shadows for the first time. Light washed over his face, revealing tired eyes, a rough jawline, and the kind of expression carried only by men who had seen too much and lost even more. People stared, whispers building around him like smoke. The leather-jacketed bidder scoffed loudly. "Who he is," he mocked. "He's a crippled mutt. That's all." But the stranger didn't even glance his way. His attention stayed locked on the shepherd, who lifted his head higher than he had all night. Something flickered in the dog's gaze, confusion, recognition, hope struggling to break through. The stranger swallowed hard, emotion pressing against his voice as he finally spoke. "His name is Chase," he said softly. "And he wasn't supposed to be here." Gasps rippled through the barn. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "Chase? Chase from the Hale unit?" he asked, disbelief shaking his voice. The stranger nodded once. A sudden wave of recognition swept through the crowd. Even those who didn't know the dog personally had heard stories about the canine who saved officers during a warehouse explosion, about the heroic shepherd whose career ended in a split second of courage. Until now, everyone assumed his handler had abandoned him. But the truth was far more complicated. The stranger stepped even closer to the ring, emotion gathering at the corners of his eyes. "I'm Ryan Hale," he said. "Chase was my partner." The barn went completely still. No whispers. No movement. Even the leather-jacketed bidder froze, taken aback. The shepherd's body trembled as the name hit him like a forgotten scent carried home on the wind. Ryan, the one voice that had stayed with him through every mission, every night, every moment of danger. The man who had held him after the explosion. The man he thought he had lost forever. Ryan's voice cracked as he continued. "After the blast, they told me he didn't survive. They told me he was gone." His jaw tightened, pain surfacing as he relived the memory. "I spent months believing I lost him, lost the only partner who never failed me." His hands curled into fists. "I only found out last week that he had been moved here, that he'd been abandoned, injured, and sold like he meant nothing." Chase whimpered, a sound full of recognition and aching longing. He took a shaky step forward, his injured leg trembling violently beneath him. Ryan moved closer to the ring's edge, his breaths uneven. "Easy, buddy," he whispered. "I'm right here." The shepherd's tail twitched. His ears pricked fully for the first time since entering the barn. The distance between them felt alive with memory. Missions shared, nights spent in patrol cars, victories and losses only they could understand. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The leather-jacketed bidder clenched his jaw, but his arrogance faltered. Something he never expected had happened. This broken mutt had someone willing to fight for him. Someone who knew his worth. Someone who loved him. Ryan lifted his hand again, higher this time, stronger. "My bid stands," he said firmly. "I'm taking my partner home." And for the first time since the explosion, Chase's eyes filled not with fear, but with hope. The crowd hadn't recovered from Ryan's revelation when the man in the leather jacket slammed his palm against a railing, jolting everyone back into fear. His eyes burned with an anger that had nothing to do with the dog's worth and everything to do with being challenged. "You think your little story matters," he barked, stepping forward with heavy, deliberate footsteps. "You don't get to walk in here and take what I came for." His voice thundered through the barn, sending uneasy glances rippling across the crowd. People shifted back instinctively, creating space around him like he carried a storm inside his chest. Ryan didn't back down. His stance remained steady, his jaw set with determination. "This isn't a game," he said quietly, but the strength in his voice was enough to silence those close by. "He's my partner. I won't let him end up with someone like you." The leather-jacketed man scoffed, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight rather than a bid. "Partnership's over," he sneered. "All I see now is a crippled dog I can flip for profit. You want him." He jabbed a finger toward Chase. Then outbid me if you can." The auctioneer raised both hands nervously. He wasn't paid enough to manage men like this. "Gentlemen, let's keep this civil." 400, the aggressive bidder roared, cutting him off. His voice echoed so violently that even the other dogs tied along the wall flinched. A wave of murmurs rolled across the barn. The amount wasn't the issue. His intent was. People could see it in his eyes. He didn't want the dog. He wanted to win, to dominate, to prove he could take what the quiet stranger wanted. Ryan inhaled slowly. His eyes shifted from the man to Chase, watching the shepherd trembling on uncertain legs. His gaze locked on him with pleading familiarity. The air around them thickened, heavy with memory and unspoken promises. Ryan raised his own hand. 500. His voice didn't need volume. The conviction behind it struck harder than any shout. The crowd went silent again, everyone sensing the depth behind the number. It wasn't money. It was a vow. The aggressive bidder snarled. 600. His face reddened with rage. He stepped closer to the ring, close enough that Chase's ears flattened instinctively. The dog gave a low, uneasy growl, weak but still protective. The man smirked darkly. "Still think he remembers you?" he taunted. "He can barely stand." Ryan's eyes hardened. He stepped forward too, not in anger but in defense, placing himself between the bidder and Chase. 700. The barn gasped. No one had ever seen such a battle over an injured K9 before. This wasn't bidding anymore. This was war, silent, emotional, dangerous. The leather-jacketed man leaned in, his fists clenched so tight the skin around his knuckles whitened. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "Walk away." Ryan didn't even blink. "Bid," he said calmly, "or leave." Tension crackled through the air like electricity. Chase watched both men with trembling anticipation, waiting to see who truly deserved him. And for the first time, the dangerous bidder hesitated. The barn felt like it was holding its breath. The dangerous bidder's hesitation stretched into a long, uncomfortable silence, thick enough to make even the walls seem tense. His jaw twitched, eyes darting between Ryan and the trembling shepherd, as though he was calculating not just a price, but the challenge to his pride. People around him began to pull back further, sensing the fuse burning down inside him. The auctioneer shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. In the center of the ring, Chase stood frozen, his eyes moving between the two men, one he feared and one he longed for. Finally, the leather-jacketed man exhaled sharply, shoving a hand through his hair in frustration. 800, he barked, each word dripping with hostility. The number slammed into the silence like a punch. Gasps spread across the barn. It was an absurd bid for an injured dog, but everyone knew he wasn't bidding for value. He was bidding for dominance, to prove he could take what Ryan wanted, no matter the cost. Chase winced at the man's voice, his body trembling with instinctive fear. Ryan didn't speak immediately. His face remained calm, but his eyes held a storm. He looked at Chase, not at his injuries, not at his weakness, but at the partner he thought he'd lost forever. Memories flickered through his mind, patrol nights, shared victories, the explosion, the guilt he had carried thinking he'd failed him. Ryan lifted his hand slowly, steadily, with the certainty of a man who had already made his choice long before this auction began. 1,000, he said quietly. A collective gasp shook the barn. The dangerous bidder's mouth fell open, disbelief twisting into rage. "You're out of your mind," he snarled. "He's broken. He's useless." His voice boomed with fury, but Ryan didn't flinch. He stood like a shield, silent, unshaken, immovable. The bidder clenched his fists, blood rushing to his face as he prepared to shout another bid. But then he stopped. Something in the crowd had shifted. People stared not at him, but at Ryan. Respect growing, sympathy spreading, judgment weighing heavier on the bidder than any number. He felt it, and he hated it. He stepped back slightly, his shoulders tightening. He glared at Ryan, then at Chase, and then he let out a low, furious growl. "Fine," he spat. "Take your pathetic mutt." He turned sharply, shoving past chairs as he stormed toward the exit. The barn released the breath it had been holding. The auctioneer swallowed, lifted the microphone, and spoke with relief echoing in his voice. "Sold to the gentleman in the back." Chase's ears perked. Ryan's chest tightened. And for the first time since the explosion that tore their lives apart, their paths were finally leading back to each other. The moment the auctioneer's final words echoed through the barn, Ryan felt something inside him loosen, something heavy he had carried for far too long. But he didn't rush forward. He approached Chase slowly, carefully, as if afraid the dog might crumble under too much movement or emotion. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for him without being asked. Their expressions had shifted from curiosity to awe. They watched not an owner retrieving a dog, but two partners trying to find their way back to one another after a tragedy that nearly erased them both. Ryan stopped just outside the ring, his breath catching as Chase lifted his head toward him. Chase's body trembled with every shallow breath. His hind leg wobbled, pain forcing him to shift his weight unevenly. Yet despite the exhaustion clinging to him, he tried. He truly tried to stand taller. His eyes locked onto Ryan with a mix of disbelief and fragile hope. Slowly, his tail gave the faintest twitch, as though his body remembered before his mind could. Ryan lowered himself to one knee, hands resting gently on the dirt. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I'm not leaving again." The shepherd's ears perked at the sound of the voice he had once trusted with his life. The auction assistant unlatched the ring gate and stepped back quickly, recognizing the moment unfolding before him. Chase took a shaky step forward, then another. His injured leg buckled slightly, but he caught himself. With a soft whine that echoed years of loyalty, he pressed his head against Ryan's chest. Ryan's arms wrapped around him instinctively, pulling him close in a hug that trembled with months of grief and guilt. "I'm sorry," Ryan whispered into the dog's fur, his voice breaking. "They told me you were gone. I should have found you. I should have known." Chase exhaled weakly, leaning his full weight against him, as if forgiving him in a single breath. People in the crowd wiped their eyes quietly, their earlier judgment melting away. They had come to buy animals, not witness a reunion that felt bigger than the wooden walls around them. The vet on site approached cautiously. "He needs immediate care," she said gently. "He's been standing too long, and that leg, it's worse than it looks." Ryan nodded, keeping one hand on Chase's neck. "I'll take him," he said firmly. "Just tell me what he needs." Chase nuzzled his palm softly, trusting him without hesitation. Together, they moved toward the exit, slowly, painfully. Chase limped beside Ryan, each step an effort, but an effort he made willingly now that he knew he wasn't alone. Outside, the evening air hit them with a cool breeze, carrying the scent of open fields and freedom. A small mobile vet unit was already preparing equipment. Ryan lifted Chase gently, allowing the dog to rest on a padded stretcher. Chase's eyes followed him the entire time, refusing to break contact even for a moment. As the vet checked his leg and cleaned the wounds, Chase's body relaxed for the first time all night. His breathing slowed, his muscles softened. Ryan stayed right beside him, kneeling close enough that Chase's nose brushed his sleeve. "You're safe now," Ryan murmured. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." And in that quiet space outside the auction barn, under fading daylight and trembling relief, Chase finally closed his eyes, surrendering not to pain, but to peace. The weeks following the auction felt like stepping into a new life, one built slowly, carefully, and with more patience than either Ryan or Chase had ever needed before. Chase's injuries were worse than they appeared, and the vet's reports only confirmed what Ryan feared: untreated wounds, nerve damage, and deep trauma that went far beyond the physical. But Chase wasn't fighting alone anymore. Every morning, Ryan sat beside him on the clinic floor, letting the shepherd rest his head on his leg while the vet gently worked. Chase's eyes followed him everywhere, as if terrified he might vanish again. Ryan understood. He stayed, without fail. Rehabilitation began with the simplest movements, lifting his injured leg, stretching it gently, encouraging blood flow where stiffness threatened to take over. Chase struggled, panting heavily through the exercises, but he pushed on, fueled by something stronger than pain. Ryan stayed close, speaking softly, guiding him through each tremble and each hesitant step. "Easy, that's it, buddy," he whispered. Chase's ears perked at the familiar encouragement he had once followed into danger. This time, though, the battle wasn't against criminals or explosions. It was against doubt, against the belief that he wasn't useful anymore. As the days turned into weeks, Chase began to change. His coat gained its shine back. His tail, once tucked low with fear, started to lift. His eyes grew bright again, glowing with the loyalty that had never truly left him. Ryan took him to a quiet field behind the clinic every afternoon. They walked slowly along the fence line, the sky stretching open above them like a promise. Chase limped at first, hesitant and unbalanced, but each day he grew a little steadier. And every time he stumbled, Ryan knelt beside him, offering a hand, a word, a moment of support. Their bond, once fractured by misinformation and time, was stitching itself back together, thread by thread. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the field gold, Chase stopped walking. He turned toward Ryan, ears forward, tail wagging in a soft, hopeful rhythm. Ryan knelt down, confused. Chase took one weak step closer, then pressed his forehead against Ryan's chest, just like he used to before missions. The gesture hit Ryan like a wave. His throat tightened, emotion flooding through him. "You remember," he whispered, brushing his hand through the shepherd's fur. "After everything, you still remember." Chase exhaled softly, his eyes closing with trust. As Chase healed physically, the emotional scars also began to fade. No longer did he wake with sudden jolts of fear. No longer did he whimper at loud noises or flinch at shadows. Ryan slept near him during the first nights at home, laying a blanket on the floor beside Chase's bed. Sometimes he woke to find Chase staring at him, eyes soft but uncertain, as if checking Ryan hadn't disappeared. Ryan would place a hand on his head, reassuring him quietly, "I'm not going anywhere." Soon enough, short walks turned into longer ones. The limp became less noticeable. Chase began testing gentle runs, small bursts of energy that made his tail wag with victory. The vet watched his progress with growing astonishment. "I didn't think he'd come this far this fast," she admitted. "Most dogs with injuries like his, they don't bounce back easily. Whatever he's fighting for, it's strong." Ryan looked down at Chase, who leaned against his leg with quiet devotion. "He's not fighting alone anymore," Ryan said. And for the first time since the explosion tore their lives apart, man and dog began moving toward a future not defined by what they had lost, but by what they were rebuilding together. It was late evening when the moment came, unexpected, unplanned, and sharper than anything Ryan or Chase had prepared for. They were walking along the quiet trail near Ryan's home, enjoying one of the first nights Chase had managed without limping. The sky glowed orange, painting their shadows long across the dirt path. Chase walked slightly ahead, nose lifted, tail swaying with calm confidence. He looked almost like his old self, and the sight alone made Ryan's chest warm with pride. But then a sudden rustle broke the peace. A man stepped out from behind the trees, the same leather-jacketed bidder from the auction. Ryan stopped instantly, instincts snapping into place. The man's smirk carried the same venom he had shown that night, but now it was darker, more personal. "So this is where you hide," he snarled. "Thought you made a fool of me? Thought I'd just let that go." Chase froze, his muscles tightening as he recognized the voice that once filled him with fear. The man stepped forward, gripping something inside his jacket that made Ryan's pulse spike. He positioned himself subtly between the stranger and Chase. "Leave," Ryan warned. "Now." But anger blinded the man. "That dog cost me money," he spat. "And respect. I'm taking something back tonight." He lunged, pulling a blade from his coat. Before Ryan could react, Chase surged forward, not fast, not flawless, but with every ounce of loyalty still burning in him. His body collided with the attacker's arm, knocking the blade loose. The man stumbled back, shocked by the force of a dog he thought was broken. Chase stood protectively in front of Ryan, growling low and steady, his injured leg trembling but refusing to fail him now. Ryan knelt beside him, one hand on Chase's shoulder. "Easy, buddy," he whispered, pride swelling in his voice. The attacker scrambled away, grabbing the blade and running into the trees, too stunned to fight further. Ryan didn't chase him. He stayed focused on Chase, who panted shakily, adrenaline rushing through his recovering body. "You saved me," Ryan murmured, pulling him close. Chase's tail gave a tired wag, his eyes warm and steady as they met Ryan's. Later that night, after calling the authorities and ensuring the danger had passed, Ryan sat with Chase on the back porch. The moonlight brushed softly over the shepherd's fur. Chase rested his head on Ryan's knee, breathing slow and peaceful. Ryan stroked his neck gently. "I thought I rescued you," he whispered. "But today, you reminded me you've always been the one protecting me." Chase blinked up at him, and in that quiet, beautiful way only dogs understand, leaned closer, as if to say he never stopped being a guardian, not even when the world forgot him. Ryan smiled through the emotion tightening his throat. "You never gave up on me, did you?" Chase exhaled softly, closing his eyes in complete trust. And that was the truth of their story. Not of a wounded dog saved by a man, but of a loyal partner who waited, believed, and protected until the very end. This story teaches us that worth is not measured by strength, perfection, or appearance. True value comes from loyalty, courage, and the heart we show during our hardest moments. Just like the injured canine, many individuals are overlooked when they are no longer useful, yet they still carry wisdom, love, and potential. Compassion has the power to save lives, heal wounds, and restore dignity. When we choose kindness over judgment, we give others a chance to rise again. Never abandon those who once stood by you, and never underestimate the difference one caring person can make.